Welcome to the Practice Podcast, conversations probing the nature of practice. I'm your host, Dave Fearon. Folks, I am delighted to have finally caught up with Christine Fusciello, who was a student of mine in a previous century, but she was very young. and I was too. But it was an interesting time to be in a course of studying management at that time, because we talked a lot about management being about control, about nailing down the systems. The quality aspects more had to do with standardization, and it all seemed to make sense back in the 90s and even in the early 2000s. But ever since, it makes less and less sense, because now we're in a world of agile, right, Christine, and fast and technology with artificial intelligence chasing our butts, to try to take our jobs away. So a lot of that's going on, and you've lived through it for a number of corporate jobs, and you're living through it into your future. So the gist, Christine, of work that you've done in recent years around finding, recruiting, and developing high potential people for corporate America, in your case, for travelers. What was sort of the gist of that work for you?
Sure. So I definitely have spent the vast majority of my career in the HR space, and most recently, the last 6 really focused on emerging talent, early career, so fresh out of college, which is such a great demographic to work with, and really just getting in and helping them grow. So going to campuses or recruiting from different campuses to extract high energy, driven, curious individuals. So I was working with the technology group, so really digging in to attract individuals that possess some of those characteristics. Thirsty to learn.
Now, in order for you to do that part of the job, how did they find their way to you? Where were they in that whole recruitment cycle side of the work? In other words, let's start it another way. Where did your company find them to even have them consider coming into the leadership programs that you were leading?
Yeah, that's a great question. So a couple different ways. So the program that I led was pretty well known on different college campuses. The company is pretty well known in the Hartford area. And so it would be going on campuses. Also, we would post. So it was open and available to other individuals. At some point, we started to look also at not only college grads, but individuals that had been out of school for a couple years, still early in their careers. And most recently, because the program focus really started to be more targeted towards software engineers, we opened up our criteria to look at individuals that were graduating from technical boot camps, predominantly software engineering types of boot camps. Yeah. So there was a couple different ways that we would, reach into those campuses, boot camps, and this general posting to capture the type of candidate that we were looking for.
Now, starting back to the point of rapid change, what I've been watching from somewhat afar now, but I saw the trend coming for years, was that there was a perception of a dwindling supply of people being prepared in the area that you're talking about. And at the same time, a very fast growing demand for that sort of work, the people who could provide that sort of work. So it was a bit of a not so perfect storm, wasn't it? So I happen to have been involved when I was in the last years of my work as a management professor at Central in the Travelers effort to bring in underrepresented people from the various minority groups.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, so I was a bit in tune with what was going on with that perfect storm. There was growing concern that they wanted really highly capable people, possibly very, very early in their careers, but so did everyone else. And Hartford had United Health Groups. They had so many other employers, and almost everyone suddenly said, "Hey, wait a minute, we've got the file drawers are gone. We have to automate, and we have to automate fast." And it's not just technologists coming around and making sure that the computers are plugged in correctly. This is a lot more. This is big data. This is all those trends.
Mm-hmm.
And so you had to really have a reputation in the programs that you led, Christine, so that people were saying, well, I could get into a leadership program at company X or company Y, or I could go down to ESPN. Why would I want to go to this company? And you guys had to provide a pretty solid but enticing answer to that. So what did you tend to say to people about coming with you instead of all these other choices?
So I would say, we started off attracting them at the intern level. So we really used the intern experience, which was a 10 to 12 week experience that gave them real hands-on real work, right? So they came in and they were doing real work, part of agile teams. They were engaging with participants of the program. They were getting to learn and understand technology in a Fortune 100 company, right? And so I think that was very attractive to them. There were other opportunities to network. So very similar to other LDPs, I think it was word of mouth. We had participants and interns that had great experiences. They went back to their campuses and talked about that.
Mm-hmm.
And they would build relationships with participants and managers within the company. So it was an easy, when it was time to graduate and to land their full-time job, it was a really easy decision for them to want to be a part of the LDP because they received pieces and parts of it during their internships.
So that was sort of priming the pump, and that definitely was important when I, again, mentioning my experience with it. And I can remember the conversations I would have in my office where they would say, well, I did have a great summer internship at Travelers or whatever company they want to talk about, but now I've got to decide on plugging my life into this company for an indefinite period. Now, that was some years back. Given what I've said about the hyper competitiveness in our region and across the country, actually, for people who can become really effective corporate citizens at the same time can provide the technical skills that you're calling on, you had to you had to deal with. I would say to them, well, remember, this is a big part of your living day. You're going to be living in that company in more hours than you are in almost anything else you do. Well, don't be scared about that. It's the truth. So these are going to become your friends, your family. These are going to become sometimes your competition. But while, yes, your skill set is attractive to them now, what's probably going to keep you in that company is how you become a practitioner in that company, someone who is feeling like when you step into that, off the elevator and onto that floor, that you're home. Now, maybe I was being a little over romantic about that, Christine, but what do you think? Because you brought them in, but your company also loses people. They don't always feel at home after a while, particularly if they're coming in from a different non-traditional way, like a boot camp versus the intern program.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would agree with you around the relationships. I think that is part of the sticking point. I think we've all heard people leave people, not necessarily leave the company per se.
Yeah, sure.
So the relationships can make or break the experience.
Mm-hmm.
And so in the program, we really are encouraging individuals to make those deep relationships. So we set time aside, right? Formal and informal networking formal and informal mentorship to make those connections, to just increase overall engagement, satisfaction with the company. It's, no one wants to be at a place where you feel like you don't belong or that you're not part of something, a bigger purpose.
Yeah, and more than ever. I mean, it's like you just quoted everything I've been reading, and very, very accurately, that it is about feeling that there's a alignment between their purpose for their own practice and how they want to grow themselves through that practice and the organization's purpose. And sometimes it's very simply, they're doing some really cool things in data capture, and or really cool things in analytics. But that's only the start. After that is, to your point, who will I be working with? How will I be listened to? Will I be able to have as much information access as I need to perform my job? Because here's what hangs over the companies that you've been part of, Christine, and it still hangs over in the Hartford area and probably with a lot of larger corporations. I don't want to become a number. I don't want to be a widget. I don't want to be someone who's plugged into a square peg. So all of that sense, plus also their company is run, by people who are out of touch with the realities of my life. Some of those are stereotypic things, which had to be overcome if they're going to settle in and feel comfortable. Mm-hmm. And you as a coach, as you have been in the roles in the last 6 years, how do you talk to people about that? How do you help them understand that some of those stereotypes are old news and probably not part of the company's future?
So I think one of the things is helping them understand what their sphere of influence is today and what it can be, right? And so we'll talk through what relationships can you control? What relationships do you need to take a little bit of risk? How do you kind of get that exposure? And I would say the, emerging talent coming in, that's a concern of theirs. They really want to make sure they get the exposure to the senior leaders. So the program, I think, when we're talking out on campus or just talking to individuals that might be interested in the LDP, that's something that we talk about. You do have exposure to the senior leaders. And so, when you have those opportunities, go in prepared to some of those discussions. And it could be a group discussion, but come in with questions. Senior leaders will remember that. They will remember the thoughtful, provocative kind of question that leaves them thinking, as long as it's appropriate, right? But I think those are just, how do you take advantage of those opportunities to differentiate yourself? And that can be done in a host of different ways, getting involved in enterprise-wide initiatives and activities that you can merely just volunteer for. So there's all different ways that you can engage to be seen and known. I think, with their different work teams, by all means, you're not a number. I mean, they're small enough, agile work teams. Everyone is going to know who you are and what you bring to the table. Some individuals just need a little bit more help, kind of pushing out of their comfort zones a little bit.
What can you think of someone fairly recently who has really gone through what you led them through in your leadership program and have taken hold and are really thriving? And I'll drop a name. I don't remember if he was in your program or not, but one of my podcasts was with Rob Hutchinson. He came through. He started at the company and then went through the leadership program later, I think. But people like that. Now, folks, Rob and others that I've featured, they have homes, they have families, they have vacations, they have the things that really were the dream. And where Christine and I went to school together and worked together at Central Connecticut, there was a working class school. There were people who were first generation who had worked full time and gone to school full time, as probably you did, Christine.
Yeah.
And so the idea that a college degree and then getting into a wonderful company could lead to having financial security, the relationships that you always wanted, call it a marriage, whatever you want, that's all out there. So, but there's this thing in between called recruiting, getting in, being onboarded, all of that. Think of someone who you don't have to give the whole name like Rob, because he gave me permission to use his name for the podcast, but someone who you feel quite good about in terms of her or his success.
So I'm thinking of one person who comes to mind who I had spent the vast majority of time with. So at the time, the program was 4 years. And when we talk about change, we've evolved the length of time that individuals are in the program. So right now, it's like a 2 to 3 year time frame. But when I think back of when I first started and kind of went along the journey, there was an individual female who was super shy. She was a great technologist, kind of, ahead of her time and ahead of the program time, to be honest, because at that point, we weren't as deep in the technical, but that's what she brought. And it was really helping her come out of her shell to be comfortable standing in front of larger groups of people and talking and being able to raise her hand, because she had great ideas, but just taking the risk where she's sitting with individuals that are much more senior to her. And being able to, in her shy little voice say, hey, I have an idea. Can we, what about this? Should we try this? And it was, I think that's one of the things that's personally rewarding for me, is to see the evolution and the transformation of individuals like her come in fresh out of college and, year over year, see them step out and become them, like this new version of themselves, and be able to lead and direct and get that acknowledgement from senior leaders that they're valuable players in the organization.
Oh, I know. That is so sweet. Yeah. And do you know how she's doing?
She's doing really well. Doing really well.
Does she still speak in a soft little voice?
Not as much. We have a graduation ceremony every year. And when we were still, this was pre-COVID, she graduated pre-COVID. And so she had volunteered along with another individual to represent her class. Her class was of, I think, 12. We had roughly 11 or 12 graduates. And they both stood up on stage and represented their class and the class experiences. And so she, that was a great way for her to kind of end her time.
Yeah.
And do something bold for, in her mind, doing something really bold to stand up in front of. And in our graduation ceremony, we have, some of the top senior leaders of the company attending that. So it's high, the stakes are somewhat high.
Yeah, I can imagine that. And yet look what the company has in that one individual, multiplied by so many that you helped. They have someone who came in as a strong technologist who really was going to be on the cutting edge of learning if they let her be, so she could become more and more knowledgeable, proficient, and able to express the advanced ideas that the company needs. That is gold. But wrapped around that is a fully fledged human being who, in her case, tends to be a little socially shy. And if that had not been, if she hadn't been coached out of that, and the people who were relating to her weren't in a culture which said, let's get everyone's voice up to be heard, she could have gone to those other places I mentioned earlier who are competing, and she could have taken that technical credential and walked through the door. But now she's there. And if you were doing this work for any other company, knowing what you now know, Christine, if you help them get someone like her or him or all the different folks that we need, you would be doing these companies a hugely strategic favor, and they'd be obviously compensating you. But it wasn't that long ago, back when you and I were first meeting, when there wasn't that feeling of how important the early labor market was to these companies. It was sort of like, yeah, diamond. I'm not putting words in your mouth, but I always had that feeling because I was pitching our students everywhere I could, Stanley and Cigna, all the places where I had any relationships, healthcare, and they were saying, "Oh yeah, well, that's good, but just have them fill out the papers, and later it was have them put up their name on the website. We'll see." No, it's got to be you. This is gold here. This is the future of the company. But over time, I'm thinking it's been more a realization at the strategic level of corporate thinking that these programs like the ones you've been part of are truly important. I'm putting words in your mouth. What do you think?
No, I agree. I would say for the company that I represented, the technology leadership development programs was a solution for real business problems, right? There were real strategies that are tied to the reason why these programs exist. And so there are seven at Travelers. And so the technology LDP was only one of those.
Yeah.
For technology, it was and has evolved to be one of the primary pipelines to bring in technical emerging talent into the organization, which then helps to feed succession plans,
all the others,
plans,
finance,
to help us reduce our global sourcing footprint. So there are real business problems that these programs and these individuals are coming in to help solve.
Yeah. And that gets noticed at the top tier, and it noticed by the board, and ultimately the customer and your brokers and others who want to feel that they're selecting to represent a product that's not only well underwritten, but it's speedily underwritten with no errors. So you have the outcomes that the company promises to the various stakeholders that are more and more conditioned to high-tech, high-touch connections. And I know that's used to be a little bit of a jargon, but I think it's true now, don't you? That the touch part, that the normality of brilliant people is important these days.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think the things that companies might not think about is the intangibles that come along with it. Yes, it's a big investment, right? There's time, there's energy. You need, many people to help mentor and coach and bring these individuals along, but they're coming in with outside views, right? They are exposed to different things at school. They may have had different internships. They're bringing fresh and new ideas and energy. The amount of the energy that they bring is it's contagious. And it really is something I think companies miss out on when they don't have programs or a way to attract this new talent into their organizations.
I love the idea that each individual who's recruited and brought in is a power source of energy. I don't mean power in the traditional sense, but the kind of energy that it does take, like that young woman, to put those ideas out there and push them through the resistance field that's always going to be there for new ideas. And that kind of energy is, as you say, it's contagious. I'd love to say, in a way, that energy then would affect infect a 170-year-old company and start to spread, so that people in the mid-career and even later in their careers would start feeling energized because they have those people on their teams, or they have them coming to the enterprise projects, or out representing them as volunteers, re-energizing a very old company, and of which we have 4 or 5 major companies in Hartford. Each one, again, the batteries are getting low. We used to talk, maybe even when we're talking trends in our management class, Christine, about the aging out of the workforce, and the fact that a tremendous number of senior leaders were at a point where they were going to be saying goodbye, and who was going to be succeeding them. What's the succession? If you were, I'm going to hand you a crystal ball in these last few minutes. What's the future of this approach, leadership development programming approach to major companies? Is it going to be something that's going to take even more hold? Is it going to evolve into something else? We just got through a pandemic where we lost contact with thousands of people, primary contact. So maybe it's just a restoration process, if you will, of getting people back together. But what do you see about this field, if you were to stay in it? Because you can always choose to do something else in human resources. Right. But you've been snake bit. You've been part of this very rich experience of bringing high-priced, high-powered young talent into your company.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and I would say it is one of the. I feel very fortunate to have been a part of such a great program for so long. And it's interesting because I have a meeting next week with someone who leads an LDP forum. And that was one of the questions I had is what is the future trend? Do we see that more companies are adding LDPs, or is it staying the same, or are people stepping away? We just went through this whole redefinition, transformation of the purpose of our technical program. Are other companies doing the same? And so I'm starting to poke around and ask that question. So I'm not sure I have a great answer. I would like to think that companies see the value in it. There is obviously a cost, but there's also a return on the investment. Mm-hmm. So I guess it just really depends. I'm surprised not more companies have it, and I wonder why they don't. So maybe that's kind of where my head's at right now. Is I would love to see more of it, but I'm biased because I've been a part of it and I see the value that it brings.
Great answer. My understanding is that there was one leadership development program at your company over 30 years ago, the financial leadership program. And that was because they were a finance and are a finance company. So sometimes you'll see a leadership development program with a history like that. It was the program. And when I started knowing about the company, they were then beginning to add programs in pricing and marketing. There was small programs in HR, but if I were to get a sense of the lean, it would be, well, we're just going to build up that finance leadership program because those are the kind of people who rise to the senior level. I don't think it's quite the same anymore. I think, yes, that's true. But there could be a person coming up through the technology stream who could become CEO someday, and it could be a young woman. And she may be only 39 when she becomes CEO, and she may be Latina. So these are the kind of changes. So I don't think you can say, well, we'll have our one big ticket program, and then we'll have all of these small programs. I think what they've got to look at is essentially where the main arteries for their business, for the energy we talked about. And it's not just finance, and it's not just product development, or it's not just in that company. It's not just claim. It could be always going to be underwriting in the insurance world. But what sort of underwriting? I had a podcast last week with a young former Edge student who's doing underwriting down for Travelers, based in Fort Lauderdale. He's underwriting in Puerto Rico and in other places where there's been huge disasters, and he loves it. He loves the work. But I knew him, and I could tell you that he would sit in my office and he'd say, I don't even have understanding why insurance, But then I said, yeah, they found you in the Capital Community College and you got an internship. And he said, well, I get it. I do get it. But and then there was another young man who had the same problem. It came, from his culture. He could not get his culture to understand why he wasn't going to go out and work in a machine shop. And that was, so he said, well, they can't see insurance.
Right.
They can see I bring home some metal that I shaped into a part. And so we had these conversations. So, but in terms of the understanding the future now, I think there's going to be many points of rise for the kinds of leadership development needed. And I want to I want to stress the point, leadership development, not just technical acumen or business acumen, all the other acumen, but to be able to see change coming and dive into it, swim around, change. That's what Peter Vail wrote about in terms of why do you need leadership at all? Change. That's the only reason. Change. So you need people who relish it, who make it happen, and look for it to happen again. So that, again, could come from just about anyone in a company of the ones that you've been part of. What do you think the concern of the forum you're going to be talking to next week is then about the LDB movement? Are they sensing that it's going to go this way, or are they wondering too?
Yeah, I don't know. So I'm hoping, and I can definitely double back with you on what my findings are on what the trend is. It'll be interesting to see if any are created to offset some of the resignations and just talent movement that we're seeing more globally. Yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think you're onto that, though. There is this big resignation phenomenon that's never been seen before. And that's new generation. We label them X's and Y's and early millennials and all of that. But it's basically people, not just that group, but people who have been so dislodged in the last 2.5 years from what their circumstances were, that when they return, they're not going to want a repeat of this part of those circumstances that were negative or that held them down and made them feel less than they knew they were when they were basically able to be all themselves at home. So that's going to be an interesting thing. Corporate culture is going to make a big difference, isn't it?
It definitely is. And I think how companies respond to all that's happening out in the marketplace, how are you reaching down and ensuring that you're connecting with the individuals that you have, especially this demographic? How are we engaging them? How are we making sure they understand what their career path looks like? I think if they can see it and they feel that it's tangible and they can get there, they're less likely to leave. It's not all about the money. Yes, the money helps, but that's not what's going to keep them in the chair. It's, am I being challenged? Do I have a voice at the table? Can I grow in this company? Am I supported? Am I recognized and rewarded? Like, it's a whole package. And so I think that's going to be even more important that companies are doing that and doing that well.
Gee, I wish I were back at Central right now and you were back there, and I would put you in the chair to prepare our students to make that case for themselves when they graduate. We used to have a co-op program that really did a lot of that. 6 months, and they learned a tremendous amount. But what I see on that side when I left was still a bit of intimidation on the part of the student, feeling about going to make a case to start even in a regular job, let alone a leadership program. So we used to host office hours, and we would have fabulous folks come in and sit there and look at their resumes and look them in the eye and give them some coaching and try to get their spirits up. But it's a heavy lift for a lot of people. And you have provided a wonderfully supportive leverage to help them make that lift. And I see you doing that in other ways as long as you care to in your future.
Thank you. Thank you.
Very impressed. You learn well in my management class.
I loved your management class. I was a non-traditional student. So
yes, you were. That's what we used to call you guys.
Full time and going to school at night and kind of trudging through that. And so I loved it, your class, because it was non-traditional. It had real life application right away. You didn't have to wait. You could just take what you learned. I mean, and I was joking with you around Fast Company, like reading the Fast Company article and innovation way back, like even way back then. So, and it's quite a few years.
Well, yeah, but am I right that you brought you were working for, was it the CEO of?
Dan Wheeler. I wasn't working with him, but I was in his overall line of business. And we had the opportunity to partner together for the United Way Giving campaign. And so that's was my exposure to him. And he was phenomenal.
He came to class. And see, that really got me started on that innovation. It was so effective. The students' eyes were as big as, pie plates. A real, senior leader, corporate leader in a very, very newly dynamic field of health insurance, very different. And he made that place. I can still remember him, and he was very down to earth, and the students warmed to him. And I thought, I'm going to do lots more of that. So you, Christine, you started my innovation interest. I had a guest every week for the remaining 17 or 18 years that I taught there, of all sorts, as well as taking people out when I could to, various business locations and getting them that feel. Because that's what I was preparing. I was preparing people who were comfortable talking with a CEO and comfortable walking around on a shop floor and asking politely if a worker could tell you a little bit about what they do. It's why study organizations in books alone when you've got them all around you. Just get in there and make it happen. So you were very helpful to me as my student. I'm very proud of you. I'm delighted we reconnected. And yes, after you've had a little more time to see what's going on, read some tea leaves, let's have a Christine Fusciello 2.0.
I would love that. That would be phenomenal. I thank you so much for all of the practices and exposures that you instilled in me early on, because I was early on in my career way back then, and I've been able to carry that forward, and so very grateful for that.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks for listening to the Practice Podcast, where we discuss practice with a capital P. If you'd like to hear more, listen in on Spotify, Automatic, and Apple Podcasts, or go to enactionresearch.com/podcast-page. And if you'd like to learn more about social inaction and the nature of practice, head over to enactionresearch.com for more information. Thank you for supporting this show. We look forward to hearing from you soon.